Okay, so let's begin with the first focal point, which is beginnings in Germany. Now, I know I told you part of the story already earlier, pero let's get a little more specific now. So, what are the key developments exactly? As you know, there's this guy, his name is Martin Luther, and as part of his critique against the Catholic Church, he releases this document called the 95 Theses in 1517. And oh my gosh, this guy is sassy. So the f- the pamphlet, it's actually a pamphlet ng 95 reasons I don't like Catholic practices. Not only does he have this pamphlet printed out and distributed, he takes one of the copies and he nails it to the doors of a church. I'm not sure how accurate that story is, but it's the one that circulates. So imagine this fiery kind of monk studying religion and ultimately deciding he wants to create a different path. So, what do you think the Catholic Church was going to do but excommunicate him, right? Once he's excommunicated, madaming mangyayari. Pero, essentially, he proceeds to reorganize churches in the Holy Roman Empire after he hides out for a little bit. So, ang teaching niya ay it should be faith and scripture alone. May mga sola tayo mamaya, but we'll see later on. So versus the Catholic Church where you have a lot of ritual, you have indulgences, you have sacraments that, yeah, yung sacraments na more, what do we call this? Ritualistic in nature. Parang strip down nila yung Christianity and they tried to look at what the most essential sacraments were. For instance, there were also debates on what they should keep, like baptism. When should it happen? Is it considered a sacrament or is it just a like rite of passage? Communion, is that also a necessary sacrament in order for you to pass on into heaven later on, diba? So anyway, madaming debates. Ang point ay he stripped it down and said we should focus on the teachings of faith and scripture and a minimal amount of sacraments. So Lutheranism, therefore, becomes the first offshoot of the Protestant Reformation. And it's as we saw in the timeline, it will be followed by other offshoots. Now, centers of historical development, present day Germany, but it was the Holy Roman Empire at the time. Yeah. Okay, so Luther exists within this context of a weakened Catholic Church, and he decides, along with other reformists, may na parang yung banner statement kumbaga nila ay yung limang sola. Sola scriptura, scripture alone. Sola gratia, grace alone. Sola fide, faith alone. Solus Christus, Christ alone. No idols, no saints. Soli Deo gloria. Uh, I think it's God's glory alone. This one is not so commonly used, but if you're out and about in the world, I invite you to look at people's random stickers on the backs of their cars. Because some of the cars will say sola fide, sola gratia, sola scriptura. And some of these people tend to be like Methodist or even Anglican, sometimes Southern Baptist. So if you see those words out in the wild, the Reformation still haunts us very deeply. Anyway, so yun yung point. Okay, so ano yung nangyari? Ano yung political configurations na lumabas? Kasi syempre, Catholicism and Christianity during this time is a political tool to organize your state. So, in order for Luther to, one, be protected kasi hinahunting siya ng Catholic Church, I think at one point he was kidnapped. Anyway, so in order for him to stay safe and to continue preaching his newfound interpretation of religious texts, he has to depend on German princes to support him. So he's going to go to one state, and then if he can convince them to convert to Lutheranism, they will protect him and then organize or reorganize their state religion according to Lutheranism. So ganun siya nag-work, moving from one principality or state to another. So these principalities eventually form an alliance to protect themselves from the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor, especially when he decides to kind of stop internal rebellions. Now, why is this important for the development of European political tradition in general? No. Firstly, Luther continues to support the idea that princes are ordained by God and should not be overthrown through revolts. So ang strategy ni Luther ay to convince the monarch or the prince or whoever is ruling that the whole state should be changed. Kumbaga top-down reform siya. May mga reforms kasi na bottom-up eh. And Luther is highly against that. In fact, he supports certain militant mm, attempts to remove bottom-up revolts in the name of religion. So Luther still supports divine right of rule. And for all of the places that remain Lutheran, importante yung concept na yun because the divine right of rule will continue to shape European monarchy up until the French Revolution and the revolutions of the 19th century. No. Okay, so whether you're Catholic or not, divine right of rule survives. Na-mention ko na yung isa kanina, the 1555 Peace of Augsburg. Pero sabihin natin ulit para maalala natin. Ang key point dito ay, out of the Scamaldic Wars, because they don't want to be at war anymore, they acknowledge the legal equality of Lutheranism and Catholicism as state religions. So, wala nang right yung Holy Roman Emperor to impose their religion on internal states. Right? So the key thing that they learn is princes have the power to determine religion for their states as long as they are legally accepted religions. Okay. So yeah, this is the Holy Roman Empire in 1648. Um, so you see there are even more principalities that emerge in this space. Okay. I also want to show you one thing, which is if you look at the top part of the map, you'll notice there's the United Netherlands and there's the Spanish Netherlands. Because later on, the Dutch Republic will fight for its independence. Yeah, tapos yung, what do you call it? Yung Hansa, dito mahahanap sa cities na to. Kaya confusing siya. It used to be part of France, tas nagwar sila with Spain, and then the Netherlands would grow into that space. So just showing you some contexts. Okay, so as I said, this lecture is much shorter, so we're jumping straight into the spread of Protestantism. So, what happens? As we know, alternatives to Catholicism as the state religion emerge all across West, Central, and even North Europe, like in England, diba? In some cases, the shift to Protestant faiths leads to some form of political independence. Religious wars between Protestant and Catholic forces, but sometimes elite Protestants versus lower class Protestants, characterized the 17th century. So, for the branches of New Protestantism, na-mention na natin yung iba, pero Calvinism grows in Geneva and spreads to the Dutch Republic and Scandinavia. So, if we're looking at the map, um, Switzerland is somewhere here. Oh, ayan, napaghalata tuloy ako. Basta mag-spread siya sa part na 'to ng, ng Europe and then in the north as well. Kasi iba na naman yung magde-develop sa France. So Anglicanism, of course, after Henry VIII, develops in England, and the Calvinists develop a new kind of lower class based, or yeah, not really working class eh, parang lower class based Calvinism siya, called the Huguenots, and they will also spearhead their own set of revolts later. So here's a map, like a visual, I guess, genealogy, more appropriately, of the Christian church. So if you recall, the early Christian church before the schism of 1054 was one unified entity. Tapos magsisplit siya, um, yeah, magsisplit siya in 1054 into the Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. Yung Eastern Orthodoxy, hindi na natin na-trace masyado. Pero we know that that is the dominant religion in many Eastern European states. Now, Roman Catholicism splits during the Reformation into Protestantism. And the root word of Protestantism is protest. It's a call to reform Roman Catholic beliefs. So, out of Protestantism, we know the first one's Lutheranism. Sa Anglicanism, madaming lalabas. Dito naka-anchor ang baptism, actually, at yung Episcopalian Church. at yung Methodists. So medyo malapit yung iba nilang beliefs, but it's beyond the scope of this lecture to discuss why they erupted in that way. Calvinism, which is the third major branch to emerge, would splinter into Presbyterians and the Reformed, pero may iba pa na mawawala in the course of history. Like, there is no major religious sect today or religious denomination that still calls themselves the Huguenots. Pero Calvinists din sila dati. So you don't need to memorize these things except for the main branches. Okay? So ito yung aalalahanin natin. The early Christian church, Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman or Latin Catholicism, Protestantism, and the three major branches. Okay. So, um, right. Princes and monarchs become defenders of their chosen faiths and intervene in wars across Europe in support of other movements with similar beliefs. For instance, Elizabeth I of England sends clandestine help to the Calvinists in the Netherlands fighting the Spanish. So, as a result of this, um, one of the results of this is the Dutch War of Independence. So, remember, the Netherlands is partially part of the Holy Roman Empire, partially part of France and or Spain, depending on what period we're looking at. So yung mapa kanina, no? Anyway, the Dutch War of Independence leads to the establishment of the Dutch Republic from an alliance of Calvinist provinces. So if you look at the space where the Netherlands or the Dutch Republic emerges, a lot of these cities have two things, right? One, they're Calvinist provinces. Two, they were part of the Hansa, the Hanseatic League. And that's going to be important because it will set the tone for how they end up organizing themselves and how they end up colonizing other parts of the world. So very business oriented, very business minded yung colonization nila of the spice trade and of Indonesia, which made them a very ruthless kind of colonizer. Anyway, um, the wider context for this is they're one of the states that gains their sovereignty or gains their ability to decide their religion outside of the emperor's intervention in the Holy Roman Empire. But the Dutch Republic becomes a completely separate entity. Okay, so itong parts na to, in 1477, hindi pa lumalabas yung Dutch provinces, but some of them, like Utrecht, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, Calvincus is going to be very active in these places, and they eventually form that alliance that becomes the Dutch Republic. Okay, so in the next part of the lecture, which will be a separate video, we'll talk about the Catholic Reformation.